I said it as a joke. She looked at me for exactly 1 second, then said, "What if it's you?" And then we both laughed, and I drove home and didn't sleep for 3 hours. Hi, my name is Ben Cooper. I'm 34 years old, and I run a small bookstore called Cooper's on the east side of Portland, Oregon. It's the kind of place that smells like old paper and coffee and has a cat named Elliot who sleeps in the window and occasionally knocks a book off the shelf and acts like he didn't. I've had it for 6 years. Before that I worked in publishing, acquiring books I believed in for people I didn't. And one afternoon I decided I'd rather sell books I loved to people I actually got to talk to. My best friend is Nora Ellis, has been for 7 years. She's a freelance illustrator, the kind who gets hired to do cover art for novels and says yes to projects that interest her and no to projects that don't, which is either principled or reckless depending on the week. She's 32. She has a studio apartment 3 blocks from my store that she has decorated with plants she calls by name and prints she's made herself, and one very ugly lamp she found on the sidewalk that she insists has character. We talk every day, we have for years. I know her coffee order, and she knows mine, and neither of us remembers when that started. I know she works best between 8 and noon and falls apart creatively after 3 in the afternoon. She knows I close late on Thursdays and leave the lights on in the back because I like the way the store looks from the sidewalk when it's empty. I know she doesn't eat breakfast unless someone puts it in front of her. She knows I overstock poetry because I believe in it more than the sales numbers justify. These are not the kinds of things you know about someone you have been paying only ordinary attention to. I understood that at some level even then, I just hadn't examined what it meant. 7 years, I said it as a joke, and I didn't sleep for 3 hours. There was a book I set aside for Nora in September, 3 weeks before the joke and 4 months after she'd started drawing the store, without knowing either of those things yet. A novel by a writer I'd followed for years. Quiet, observant, about 2 people who share a city for a decade without understanding that what they have is the main thing either of them has. I read it in 2 evenings and thought about it for a week and put it at the back of the counter with a small piece of paper that said Nora and forgot about it in the particular way you forget things you've put away for someone. She found it in October, before the joke, on a day when she was looking for something to read and went behind the counter without asking because she had been coming to the store long enough that she no longer asked about certain things, and she found the book with her name on it and looked at me. "When did you put this here?" "September," I said. "I thought you'd like it." She looked at the book, then at me, then back at the book. "Have you read it?" "Yes." "Is it good?" "It's the best thing I've read this year." She turned it over and read the back, and something in her expression changed very slightly in a way I noticed and did not examine. "Okay," she said, and took it to her table. She finished it in 2 days. She didn't say much about it when she gave it back, which was how she was with books that had gotten to her. Quiet about them, protective of whatever they'd done. She just set it on the counter and said, "You were right." And I said, "I usually am about what you'll like." And she looked at me for a second, one of those seconds, and said, "I know." I didn't understand what she was doing with that look until much later. I think she understood what she was doing with it before I said anything at all. The first time I understood something was wrong with the calculation was a Thursday evening about 6 months before the joke, which is to say long before I knew I was keeping a calculation. Nora had been at a client meeting that had gone badly, the kind where someone asks for one thing and means another, and by the time you understand the difference you've already done the work twice. She came to the store after because she always came to the store after things went badly, and I made coffee and she sat at her table and told me about it with the particular controlled irritation of someone who is being very professional about something that is genuinely annoying. I listened. I said the right things. At some point she said, "You always know what to say." And I said, "You know yourself well enough that I mostly just have to confirm what you already think." And she looked at me for a moment and said, "That's exactly right. How long have you known that?" "A while," I said. She nodded and went back to her coffee. I went back to the register. But I held the question for the rest of the evening, which was, how long had I known that? How long had I been paying the kind of attention that let you say things like that to a person? At what point does paying attention become something with a name? I didn't arrive at an answer that evening. I wasn't ready to. But the question stayed, the way questions stay when they've been asked at the right time, just waiting for you to become ready to hear the answer. 6 months later, I made a joke. I couldn't sleep for 3 hours. The answer turned out to have been sitting there for a very long time. The joke, if it was a joke, had arrived in the middle of a story about a man named Tristan who had spent the entirety of a dinner date talking about his investment portfolio and had then asked if she'd been following the markets. Nora had told the story the way she always told stories, with her hands and her precise comic timing, and I had laughed in the right places and said what she wanted to hear, and then I had made the joke, and then she had said the thing, and then we had both laughed and moved on. Except I hadn't moved on. I replayed it in the truck on the way home. "What if it's you?" said easily, lightly, the way you'd answer a joke with another joke. Except she had looked at me for a second first, and I kept getting stuck on that second. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one obvious to tell. My sister would have told me I was overcomplicating it. My friend Marcus would have told me to just ask her. Neither of those answers felt adequate to the specific shape of the problem, which was this: that I had spent 7 years calling Nora my best friend and meaning it completely, and now I was lying awake replaying a single second of eye contact and trying to figure out what that meant about the previous 7 years. In the morning, I opened the store. Elliot knocked a book off the shelf. A woman came in looking for a novel her book club was reading, and I found it for her, and we talked for 20 minutes about whether the ending worked. At noon, Nora came in. She came in most days. She'd bring her laptop and sit at the table in the back corner where I kept a chair that was just for her, even though I'd never said it was just for her. And she'd work while I worked, and we'd talk when there was something to say, and be quiet when there wasn't. It had always felt entirely natural. That day she came in and said morning, the way she always said it, and I said morning, back the way I always said it. And she sat down and opened her laptop, and nothing was different at all. Except that I noticed the lamp she was sitting near, a floor lamp she'd helped me carry in from her car 8 months ago because she said the back corner was too dim, and I thought, I know when that lamp got here. I know exactly when that lamp got here. That was when I understood the problem was going to be harder to talk myself out of than I'd hoped. 3 weeks went by, everything was the same. That was the part one hadn't expected. That nothing would change, that Nora would keep coming in every day with her coffee and her work and her stories about clients, and I would keep being exactly who I had always been to her, and the whole thing would just sit there between me and myself while I tried to figure out what to do with it. I restocked shelves, I talked to customers, I ordered the winter catalog. I had dinner with Nora on a Thursday and a Sunday and another Thursday and told her about a novel I was trying to decide whether to feature, and she told me about an illustration brief that was either going to be her favorite project of the year or the one that finished her. And I drove home both times thinking about the lamp and the chair and the way she'd looked at me for exactly 1 second before she'd said, "What if it's you?" Marcus noticed something was wrong in the way Marcus always noticed things, obliquely, at the wrong moment, without much tact. He came into the store one afternoon and said, without preamble, "You look like someone who's made a decision and is pretending they haven't." "I haven't made any decision," I said. "Sure," he said, and bought a book about the history of coffee, which was not the book he came in for, and left. The more honest accounting was this: I was afraid. Not of Nora. Not exactly. I was afraid of the specific version of a conversation that ends in a silence you can't come back from. 7 years of the way things were seemed, from where I was standing, like something worth protecting even at the cost of not knowing. I kept that calculation going until her mother called. What I didn't understand yet was that someone else had already been keeping a different kind of count entirely. Nora's mother, Patricia, had been suggesting introductions for as long as I could remember. Not insistently, just the particular persistence of a woman who believed her daughter's life would be improved by a specific kind of arrangement and said so regularly without any apparent expectation that it would be taken well. Nora tolerated it with the particular resignation of someone who has been having the same argument for long enough that they've stopped bothering to win it. This time, Patricia had someone specific. A colleague's son, an architect, recently relocated to Portland, very pleasant according to everyone who wasn't Nora. She'd told me about it the way she told me most things, matter-of-factly, on a Tuesday, standing at the counter while I made change for a customer. "My mother has decided I'm meeting someone named Fletcher on Saturday," she said. "His name is Fletcher? Apparently. Are you going?" She shrugged. It seemed easier than explaining why not. I didn't say anything else about it. I rang up the customer. Nora went back to her table. That was the evening I understood the calculation had an expiration date. That evening I stayed late to restock the display near the door, and I thought about Fletcher, the architect who had recently relocated to Portland and was apparently very pleasant, and I thought about the chair in the back corner that I had never called Nora's chair but which had been Nora's chair for years, and I understood with a clarity I had been avoiding that the careful accounting I'd been doing, the one where not knowing was safer than knowing, had a limited shelf life. I didn't do anything about it that night, but I stopped pretending the calculation was working. There was a Saturday in October when the store was quiet and Nora was at her table and the rain was doing what Portland rain does in October, which is arrive without drama and stay for the rest of the season. She had been working for 2 hours, which I knew because I knew the shape of how she worked. The first hour restless, the second settled, the third unpredictable. Around 2 she closed the laptop and looked at the shelves the way she sometimes looked at them, not searching for anything specific, just taking inventory of what was there. "Do you ever regret it?" she said. "The store? Leaving publishing?" "No," I said. "Not once." She looked at me. "Why not?" I thought about it. "Because when I was acquiring books, I was always doing it for someone else's list. Here, I'm doing it for—" I gestured at the room, at the regulars at the table near the window, at Elliot asleep on his shelf, at the woman in the poetry section who came in every Saturday and never bought anything but stayed for an hour. For this. Nora looked at the room. Something moved across her face. A recognition, the particular expression of someone hearing something they had been trying to articulate themselves. "That's why I went freelance," she said. "Everyone kept asking me to make the work bigger or louder or more commercial, and all I wanted was to make it true." "Is it, now?" She looked at her laptop. "Getting there." She looked back at me. "Thanks to you, apparently. Thanks to Sandra." She gave me the look she reserved for deflection. "Ben, I know," I said. "I'm working on it." She almost smiled, went back to her laptop. The rain continued. A customer came in looking for a gift. I found them something. The afternoon moved the way Saturday afternoons moved in the store, gently, without urgency, the right pace for a place built around objects that asked for your full attention. At 5, Nora packed up and said goodbye, and I said goodbye, and she walked out into the rain with her jacket pulled up, and I watched through the window until she turned the corner, the same way I had been watching her turn that corner for years, and thought, I have always noticed this. I have just always called it something else. The summer before the joke, meaning almost 8 months before I stopped sleeping over a sentence that lasted 2 seconds, Nora and I had walked along the river one evening after dinner the way we sometimes did, and she had talked about what she wanted her work to look like in 5 years, and I had talked about whether I was going to expand the store or keep it exactly as it was, and somewhere in the middle of that conversation she had stopped walking and turned to look at the water and said, "Do you ever think about what you actually want? Not the store, not the work, just what you want?" I had thought about it honestly. "I want this," I said. "What? This?" "Walking somewhere with someone I can say things to." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a pretty small answer. Small things are usually the true ones." She had looked at me then, one of those long looks that I always registered and never decoded, and then she had turned back to the water and said, "Yeah, I think so too." 8 months later I made a joke, couldn't sleep for 3 hours. Spent 3 weeks pretending the joke was the beginning of something rather than a very late acknowledgement of something that had already been true for a very long time. When I told Nora this later, she was characteristically unsparing about it. "You said I want this while standing next to me and then spent 8 months not understanding what you meant." To be fair, I thought I was talking about conversations in general. "And were you?" she asked. I looked at her. "No," I said. "I wasn't." She nodded, unsurprised. "I know," she said. "I was there." The portfolios arrived on a Wednesday. Nora had been trying to get her work in front of a larger publisher for 3 years. Her illustration was extraordinary, the kind that made you look at a book cover and understand something about the book before you'd read a word. But the routes to the right people were narrow, and she'd been working through them carefully without much luck. I knew this because she told me everything, the same way I told her everything, because that was what we did. What she didn't know was that 2 months earlier, during a trade event I'd attended for the store, I had run into an art director named Sandra Okafor, who worked for a publishing house Nora had been trying to reach for a year. I'd mentioned Nora the way you mention someone when you genuinely believe in their work and have a moment to say so, without strategy, without expecting anything from it. I'd sent Sandra a link to Nora's portfolio the next morning and then not mentioned it because I wasn't sure anything would come of it. Something came of it, and what happened next changed something I hadn't planned to change. Nora came in on Wednesday holding her phone with the particular expression she got when something had happened that she hadn't processed yet. She showed me the email, Sandra Okafor, requesting a meeting, mentioning the portfolio, mentioning my name. "You sent her my work?" Nora said. Not accusing, just placing the pieces. "You didn't tell me. I didn't know if it would go anywhere." "That's not why you didn't tell me." She was right. I hadn't told her because I hadn't wanted her to feel watched or managed. I'd wanted the work to land on its own terms, introduced by someone who happened to have been talking to the right person at the right moment. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have told you." "Don't apologize," she said. "I'm trying to figure out why this surprises me. You've been doing things like this for years." "What do you mean?" "The lamp," she said. "The chair. The way you always have the book I want to read before I know I want to read it." She looked at me. "Why do you do that without telling me?" I looked at the counter. "Because I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything." "Ben, yeah, I've never felt like I owe you anything. I felt like you see me." I didn't answer right away. The store was quiet around us. Elliot was asleep in the window. The lamp in the back corner was on. "Nora," I said, "the joke, 3 weeks ago." She looked at me. "What about it?" "I haven't stopped thinking about it." She held my gaze for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was very even. "I know. I've been waiting for you to say something." "You knew?" "I know you," she said. "I've been waiting 3 weeks." What I hadn't fully understood in the 7 years before the joke was how much Nora had been paying attention in the same direction. I understood it gradually, through things she mentioned that she had clearly been noticing for years and had never commented on. The order in which I restocked shelves on Mondays. The way I talked to customers who came in sad versus customers who came in searching. The specific expression I had when I'd found a book I wanted to read before the store opened, which she described accurately as the expression of someone pretending to be less excited than they are. 7 years of watching me open books, I said. "It's interesting," she said. "You're a different person when you don't know anyone's watching." "That's slightly alarming." "It's actually very reassuring," she said. "The private version and the public version are the same. Most people's aren't." I thought about that for a long time. About what it meant that she had been watching closely enough, for long enough, to know the difference. About how long you can be known by someone without understanding that what's happening between you has a particular shape. Marcus had said there was no version of the conversation where asking made things worse. He had been right in the way he was usually right, simply, from the outside, without any of the complicated weight of being inside it. What I understood now, that I hadn't understood before, was that the question hadn't been whether to ask. The question had been whether I was ready to hear that someone had known me completely and clearly for 7 years and had decided to stay. The meeting with Sandra Okafor went well. Nora came to the store afterward and sat at her table in the corner and told me about it without any particular attempt at modesty, which meant it had gone better than well. Sandra wanted her for 2 covers in the spring list and was talking about an ongoing relationship if those went the way she thought they would. "You didn't have to do that," Nora said. "I know," I said. She looked at me. "Stop saying that. It's true. I know it's true. That's why I want you to stop saying it. It means you've been doing things for me without being asked for 7 years, and I want to acknowledge that properly, not just hear you deflect it." I looked at her. Properly, I said. What does that look like? She thought about it. It looks like me saying, I see you too. I always have. I just took longer to say so out loud. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the counter, at the lamp in the corner, at the chair that had always been hers, even though I'd never said so, at Elliot, who had relocated from the window to the arm of the chair and was regarding us both with his usual expression of mild contempt. For the record, I said, I wasn't joking. I know, she said. I wasn't either. Marcus came in the week before the dinner and bought another book he hadn't come for, this time a collection of essays about architecture, and said, without looking up from the back cover, You're going to do it. Do what? I said. Whatever it is you've been not doing for 3 weeks. He set the book on the counter. I can tell because you've reorganized the front display twice. I looked at the display. He wasn't wrong. I'm thinking about it, I said. Thinking about what it means. It means you're going to dinner, he said, and then see what happens. That seems simplified. Most correct things are, he said. I rang him up. He took the book. At the door he stopped. She's been your closest person for 7 years, Ben. Either that's already something or it becomes something. There's no version where asking makes it worse. I thought about that for a long time after he left. About the particular conviction of someone who had watched something from the outside and had a clearer view than the people inside it. I thought about the chair, the lamp, the 7 years of knowing how she took her coffee. The way she'd said I know you like it was the simplest thing in the world to say, because for her it was. The next morning I called her and asked her to dinner. Not in the usual way, in the other way. She said yes in the way that meant she had been waiting for the question. We didn't declare anything that afternoon. That wasn't how either of us worked. Nora didn't perform things she was still figuring out, and I didn't make announcements I hadn't earned. What happened was more like a permission, a door that had been there for a long time, finally acknowledged. I asked her to dinner. Not in the way we always had dinner, in the way that meant something else. She said yes in the way that meant she knew the difference. The dinner was at a place on the east side neither of us had been, chosen specifically so it wouldn't carry any of the particular weight of our usual places. We sat across from each other and talked for 3 hours about everything that wasn't what we were actually talking about, which I think is the only honest way to have a first real conversation with someone you've known for 7 years. At the end of the evening, walking back along the river, she put her hand through my arm the way she sometimes did on cold nights when we were walking somewhere. And I understood that she had always meant something by it that I had always noticed and never examined, and that we were both in our different ways terribly slow, and that this was probably going to be fine. The joke, she said at some point, looking at the water. I didn't say it because it was funny. I know, I said. I didn't think it was funny when I said it either. She leaned her head slightly toward my shoulder. 7 years, she said. We are genuinely the worst at this. Embarrassingly bad, I agreed. Historically bad, she laughed. The kind that came easily, the kind I had heard 1,000 times, that had always sounded like something I didn't want to be without. Things change slowly, the way things do between two people who have known each other long enough that the change is less a beginning than an acknowledgement of something that was already true. Nora kept coming to the store. The chair stayed hers, the lamp stayed on. I kept knowing which book she'd want before she asked, and she kept knowing when to hand me coffee without saying anything, and neither of us made a speech about what any of it meant, because neither of us were people who made speeches about things we could simply do instead. Her mother, Patricia, called a few weeks later. I was there when it happened, at the kitchen table with Nora while she took the call. The particular expression on her face that meant this was going to require some management. Patricia had heard about Fletcher from a mutual acquaintance and wanted to know how the date had gone. I didn't go, Nora said. A pause. Because I'm seeing someone, another pause. Someone I've known for a while. The longest pause. No, you don't know him. His name is Ben. She looked at me across the table while Patricia processed this. Her expression was the one she reserved for moments that were slightly ridiculous and entirely worthwhile. I looked back at her. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, exactly the way she might have a year ago, exactly the way she might have 3 years ago, which was the thing I had finally understood, that nothing between us had actually changed. We had just finally stopped calling it something smaller than what it was. Yes, she said into the phone. I know, it took a while. A pause. No, I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was just slow. She didn't look away from me when she said it. There was an evening in late winter when Nora brought dinner to the store because I had told her I was going to be there past closing cataloging the new arrivals. Which was true, but also the kind of task that goes better with company, and she had known that for years without my saying it. She came in at 7 with Thai food from the place on Burnside and set it on the counter and found 2 stools, and we ate while I cataloged, which meant the work went slowly because we kept talking, which was probably the point. At some point she picked up a novel from the new arrivals pile and turned it over to read the back cover, then read the first page, then put it down and looked at me. You're going to feature this one. Probably. You have that expression. What expression? The one where you've already decided something, but you're still doing the work to confirm it. I looked at her. She looked back, entirely unself-conscious about having said something that revealed how closely she'd been paying attention. For how long? That was one of the things about Nora. She didn't hide the noticing. She just offered it plainly and let you do what you wanted with it. You know me pretty well, I said. 7 years, she said. And you're not that complicated. That's either a compliment or an insult. It's both, she said. It means you're consistent. It means I always know where to find you. She went back to the novel. I went back to the cataloging. Elliot relocated from the shelf to the stool beside Nora's, and she moved automatically to make room for him without looking up, the way you make room for someone whose presence you've absorbed completely. The store was quiet around us. The rain was on the windows again. The lamp in the back corner was on, the one she'd helped me carry in from her car 18 months ago, because she said the corner was too dim, because she had been paying attention to what I needed for years before I understood what that meant. I thought, I have spent 7 years in the company of someone who sees me clearly and stayed anyway. I thought, that is not a small thing. I thought, I should stop treating it like one. In December, not for Christmas, she didn't believe in giving things on the day everyone gave things. Nora gave me a drawing. She believed in giving things when they were ready, which was a philosophy that suited someone who worked on her own timeline and applied it to everything. The drawing was the store, interior, the shelves, the light coming through the windows on the angle it came on winter mornings, Elliot in the window, the table in the back corner with one chair beside it. She had used maybe 5 colors. It looked exactly right, the way her work always looked exactly right, which meant it captured something true rather than something accurate. It's been on my desk for 4 months, she said. I kept meaning to finish it, and then I kept not changing anything, so I think that means it was done. I looked at it for a long time. The chair in the back corner, the way she'd drawn the light, the specific way she'd placed the chair, not at the table, but beside it, angled toward the room, the way it always was, the way it had always been, without my ever arranging it that way. When did you start this? June, she said. I was here one afternoon and the light was doing something specific, and I started sketching and then I didn't stop. June was before the joke, before the 3 sleepless hours, before any of the things I had spent months calling the beginning. Nora, I said. Yeah, this was done before you figured it out, she said. Yes, she had been drawing this place, drawing the chair that was hers into a picture of a room that was mine, before I had caught up. You started in June, I said. I started a long time before June, she said. I hung it near the door, where the morning light caught it the same way she had caught it in the drawing, and where I saw it every day when I opened the store, which was exactly the point. A year after the Tuesday in the back of the store when I said the thing I thought I was saying as a joke, Nora had a show. Not the covers. Those came out and went well, and Sandra commissioned 2 more, but an actual illustration show, a small gallery on the west side that had space in November and had been following her work for a while. 40 pieces, a reception, her name on the door. I helped her hang the pieces on a Saturday, not because she needed me to. She had a specific plan and specific opinions about where everything should go, but because she asked me to, the same way she'd asked for 7 years, except that the asking no longer sounded like "will you help me," it sounded like "I want you here." At the reception, she was in her element, talking to people about the work with the specific ease of someone who has finally stopped being apologetic about it. I stayed near the edge of things the way I usually did at gatherings and watched her, and at some point she found me by the door and stood beside me, and we looked at the room full of people looking at her work, and she said, "Thank you for telling Sandra." "The work told Sandra," I said. "I just made an introduction." She looked at me sideways. "Ben, yeah, you are terrible at accepting credit. I am very consistent about it." She almost smiled. "I know. It's one of the things." "What things?" She looked back at the room. "The things that have been true about you for 7 years that I was very slow to say out loud." I looked at her profile in the gallery light. "Nora." "Yeah, I said it as a joke." She turned to look at me. "I know. I wasn't joking." "I know that too," she said. "I wasn't either." She leaned against my shoulder the way she sometimes did, the way she had for years, except that now it meant exactly what it had always meant, and we both knew it. In the room in front of us, people moved among her drawings. The light was warm. It was a good November evening in Portland, the kind the city does well when it tries. 7 years of not quite saying the true thing, ending the way these things always end. Not with a dramatic declaration in the right moment, but with two people standing in a doorway, finally using the right words for what had always been there. I thought about the book I had set aside for her in September with her name on a piece of paper. I thought about the walk by the river where I had said I want this and meant her without knowing it. I thought about every Tuesday evening and every Thursday dinner and every morning she had come in with coffee and sat at the table in the corner and the lamp had been on and Elliot had been in the window and the store had been exactly what it was, and I had thought, this is enough, this is enough, this is enough, when what I had actually been thinking, if I was honest about it, was, I don't want this to ever change. She was still leaning against my shoulder. The gallery was almost empty now, the last guests finding their coats, the warmth of the evening beginning to settle. The drawing of the store, the one she had started in June, 4 months before either of us had said anything true, was hanging near the back with a small red dot on its label that meant someone had bought it, which she had told me earlier and which I had said was wonderful, and which was wonderful, and which also meant it would leave the gallery and I would never see it again. "Someone bought the store," I said. "I know." She didn't sound troubled. "You could have kept it." "I have the original," she said, "in my head. I've had it since June." I looked at the empty space on the wall where it had hung. Then I looked at her, at someone who had been drawing my store from memory for months before I understood what that meant, at someone who had been saying things in the space between words for years, and who had waited with a patience that probably exceeded what I deserved for me to catch up. "For the record," she said, not looking at me yet, "I wasn't joking either, in case that wasn't clear." "It was clear," I said. "It just took me a moment." 7 years, she said. "That's a long moment." "I know," I said. "I'm working on the pace." She turned and looked at me then, the full look, the one that had always been the most honest thing between us, and said, simply, "Good." "We were genuinely terrible at this," she said. "Historically," I agreed. "Embarrassingly so." She laughed, the real one, the one that came without thinking, and I thought, not for the first time, this is the sound I don't want to be without. I hadn't been joking. I never had.